Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast from Kates-Boylston. Conversations worth having about the culture and business surrounding death care and end-of-life care. This week, we are speaking with Tiffaney O. Hill. She is a funeral director and embalmer working in Minnesota, but she has this great story where she moved from Jamaica to the UK, to Florida, to Minnesota in pursuit of her dream of becoming a licensed embalmer and mortician. She has achieved that and has done some great stuff, but recently she wrote an article for Funeral Director Daily, and I thought it was fantastic, and we're here to talk about that, which is how she sees the funeral service in the future and some of the things she hopes improve for new funeral directors and old. So it's a great show, and I think you're going to quite enjoy it. But before we get to that, I'd like to let you listen to this message from our friends and sponsors at Homesteaders Life, and we'll catch you on the other side with Tiffaney.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteaders' financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company owned by our policy owners, we remained laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
So as I mentioned, on one of the more recent podcasts I did, I came across an article that you had written recently, and I thought it was fantastic. And I definitely want to dig into that. But before we do, I'd like to get you to where you are now. So what drew you to funeral service? And because you have a long path from where you started to where you are.
Yeah, so I grew up in Jamaica. I was born and grew up in Jamaica. My mom moved to the UK when I was 6.5, so I ended up living with my grandparents. And my grandmother, she was a member of the church choir. And on the weekends, I went along with her to funerals because we knew everybody in the community. It was a very small community called Alexandria. Funny enough, I actually live in a community called Alexandria in Minnesota now. So that's kind of full circle for me. But I would go along to funerals with her. And I quite enjoyed that because I also got to see my paternal grandmother. And she would always give me extra pocket money. So that was quite fun. And so I did that. And I always sort of admired the funeral directors, the vehicles, what they were doing. And I always had an interest ever since I was about 7 years old. So that went on, but back then you didn't have a path to becoming a funeral director in Jamaica. You didn't have a college program or anything like that back then. So I grew up.
Is it like mostly apprenticeships? Is that?
Yes, that's sort of how it was. Or people who studied abroad and came back, or it's typically family owned and run as well. And when I gone through high school, still thinking, one day I'm gonna own a funeral home. I went to college. I took the business programs, and then I went to college, studied accounting and finance at Northern Caribbean University. And I think after my first year, in the spring semester, it was Easter, and my grandmother, my dad's mom, their church has a baptism by the river every Good Friday, and I went along to that. And then we saw this funeral home opposite where the river was, where they did the baptism. And my cousins and we sort of dug into my uncle's heels because he knew the guy who ran the funeral home. And we're like, could you please take us over there? I was like, please take me. And he did. And we went over. The guy gave us a tour. He was really nice, gave us a tour of the funeral home. We had a long chat. And I think that's the moment that solidified it for me, that I wanted to be a funeral director. And I'm really going to go for it at that point.
Was it the aura? Was there wasn't anything specific? Was it the trappings at the time? Do you think that was the original?
I think it was. I think I'd already had an interest since I was a child. And then I think it was something about the aura. I walked in and somehow I felt very much at home, and I felt like I belonged, and I felt like, yeah,
Wow.
this is it. This is where I want to be. This is where I feel, I don't know, there was just a pull. I can't put my finger on quite what it was, but I just felt a pull, and it just solidified it for me in that moment.
And so how did you proceed after that? How did you go about getting your way into funeral service?
Yeah, so the following day, went to another funeral home and got another tour, and I was like, yeah, this is it. Spoke to my parents, and my mom was like, yeah, that's a little bit morbid. And then I was already on track to moving to the UK. I started looking into mortuary schools there. Then I moved there. I needed to go to college to do a science program to get into the program, but I also needed to apply once I was already in college there. It's just the way their university system is. You have to apply through UCAS and all the rest of it, which I didn't quite
Right.
understand at the time. So then I went to college, did the science program, applied for university. There was one program and I applied, and then I got a letter in the mail saying that they had canceled a program that very year. So that was in 2011.
Oh no.
So yeah, so that was my heart. My heart was absolutely broken when I received that letter from the University of Bath. But in order to apply through UCAS, you have to apply, I think, for at least 3 universities or 5, I believe. So I'd applied to other universities, but I'd applied for, because there weren't on any other programs, so I'd applied for accounting just to finish my degree, because what I did is I'd cut my degree program short and graduated with my associates because I wanted to get into funeral service. Yeah, so that was very heart-wrenching when that was cancelled. But then I went ahead and did my final year in the UK, graduated with my bachelor's degree in accounting. And then after that, I knew I didn't want to go work in accounting. I wanted to be a funeral director, and I was going to be a funeral director. I was very determined. I started talking to local funeral homes, and they were all, we're too small. We're not looking to take anybody on. It was very much about who you knew back then, I think. Funeral homes were hiring people they knew, or somebody that worked already in the industry that knew someone. So it was all word of mouth recommendation sort of thing back then.
Now, I see a lot of the news out of the UK now where they are also like, hey, look, girls can be funeral directors still.
Yeah.
And was that really also a sense there at the time, or?
Yes, it definitely was. Yeah, definitely it was something that, people still expected. I remember when I started, somebody said to me, yeah, we're used to having a middle-aged man. And throughout my career there, people would say, you're not your typical funeral director. I was like, no, I'm not. There were three things. I was young, I was female, and I'm Black. It was your typical middle-aged white man that was expected to be a funeral director. And
Right.
so I came up against that quite a lot. I remember somebody said, but you're not the usual demographic, are you? After I did the day, like I did his mom's funeral, and after the funeral, he was saying thank you. And in that moment, he was like, you're not the usual demographic, are you? And I was
Uh,
like, no, I'm not. So that was quite common. So yeah, it wasn't typical for females to be funeral directors, but I was very fortunate in eventually, after reaching out, hearing a lot of no's, we're too small, we're not taking anybody on. I reached out to Leverton and Sons funeral directors, and they said, we don't have any positions available, but we're happy for you to come in for a chat. I went in, I prepared as if I was going in for an interview for a job. And I sat and I spoke with Richard Pott, who was a director at the time. And at the end of it, we talked. He gave me a tour of the funeral home, met all the staff there. And at the end of it, he said, but we don't have any positions available. So there's not much we can do for you. And I said, well, would it be okay if I came in for a couple of days just to observe how everything works? And, and he said, yeah, that would be okay. So I went in for a few days. A few days became a few weeks. Well, first a week, and then it became 6 months. I was there volunteering full time for 6 months before I sort of created a job for myself.
If I
So
don't go away, eventually you'll have to start paying me, I guess.
it was very much like that. They kept asking me, what are we going to do with you? And I was like, well, and then, I sort of found everything that needed doing that nobody really wanted to do. And I was doing that and for 6 months. And eventually I had created something where I was very active, doing quite a lot. And they thought, okay, well, you're a very valued member of our team here, and we would like to keep you. And, so then I got to name my role an administrative assistant. I was doing memorial folders, so orders of service folders, and I was helping to get funerals onto the system, and just various different things I was doing. And yeah, so that became 6 months, and then somewhere along the lines, I was there for about a year, went full time. I was part time initially, went full time, and then about a year in, year and a half in, I started meeting with families, making arrangements, conducting funerals. And before you know it, I was doing everything. And it was 10 years later.
Wow. And so you can do it without mortuary school in the UK. You just,
Yes. Yes. So
it's just harder, clearly.
yes, it's harder to get in. But once you get in, most of what you learn is on the job training.
And so why the US and when the US, and how did you end up in Miami?
So I've always been a firm believer in formal education. And while I was excelling at being a funeral director in London, I was doing really well. I was a bit of an all-rounder, doing everything in the funeral home, not embalming, but pretty much everything else, especially on the operational side. I did all the invoicing because of my background in accounting and that sort of thing. But I always felt like there was something missing. I felt like I'd skipped a step, and especially because I wanted to go to mortuary school to begin with, I felt like I'd skipped a step. And then when it came up to the 10-year mark, I thought, okay, it's now or never. I need to do this. It's something. And I think at the time when that program got cancelled from the University of Bath, I had looked into going to mortuary school here in the US, and I'd reached out to, I believe it's University of Central Oklahoma, because they had a program out there, and my uncle was doing his PhD out at University of Tulsa at the time. So I was looking what was close to family, but it was too soon because I just moved to the UK and I just had that transition. So I didn't want to then have another transition into another country. And I was very young back then. I only started in funeral service when I was 21. So I was pretty young. I didn't want to be moving 2 countries. So it was a bit of a difficult decision to make then. But I thought about it back then. And then as it came up to the 10-year mark, I was like, you know what, now is the time to do it. So I started researching, applying for schools. And my sister lives in Florida. So I thought, why not move to Florida? It's sunny, it's not cold, and my sister's there. I've got family there. Why not? So then that's how I ended up going to the university, to Miami-Dade College.
That's fantastic. And what was it like taking courses, having already done the job, but you're still picking up some subtleties? But I can't imagine it's radically different, or is it radically different?
Oh, no, I think funerals are fundamentally the same wherever you go. I think there are cultural differences, but for the most part, I think they're fundamentally the same. So I think I found it easier doing funeral service as a student versus when I was doing accounting. I was much younger. I didn't have any experience in the accounting field. But in funeral directing, I was very experienced. So I was, my experience was very unique in that I had 10 years experience. I had worked with families. The only thing that was fairly new to me was the embalming side of it, which I had observed it before, but I hadn't actually done it. So that was the most difficult part for me. And then just putting the theory and matching the theory with the practice, I found that to be very fulfilling. And yeah,
because you got to do it backwards, right? Because a lot of times
exactly.
People get frustrated because they don't get to do everything they learned when they graduate.
Exactly. And you can't actually apply it in a real world scenario in that case when you're doing it the other way around. But for me, I was able to apply what I was learning based on my experience. And I think that made it very easy for me.
And so how long ago did you graduate from Miami-Dade?
I completed my program in December 2023.
And you missed the miserable winters from when you were in the UK?
Absolutely did not, but...
So how did you get to where you are now?
Well, as I was approaching the end of my program, I had a message on LinkedIn from Burton and, asking, saying, we love your experience. And I think I changed my LinkedIn profile to open to work because at that point I was coming up to being able to do my internship, and I changed my LinkedIn profile, and quite a few companies reached out to me, but it was a little bit tricky because I was an international student. And once I told many employers that were recruiters that, they were pretty much like, oh, we don't really understand how that works. And fortunately, I had responded to this message. Well, at first I was a bit hesitant to respond because I saw Minnesota, and I was like, "Where's Minnesota?" First of all, and then I saw it was like brutally cold, and I was like, yeah, no thanks." But then I was doing some admin a couple of days later, and I was like sort of catching up with my to-do list, and then I went back and looked at the message, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to respond. So I responded, and then Tiffaney, our in-house talent acquisition partner here, reached out to me, and we had a great chat, and she'd had some experience working with people in a previous industry who were international students as well. So that was quite nice and easy. And yeah, I did the interviews. They went really well. And I thought, okay, let me go visit. It was in December as well. So it was winter. Well, not quite, because it was the easiest winter Minnesota's had in a while. So, so I came to visit for a couple of days to see how I'd like it. And I really liked it. And I thought, you know what? Life is short. Why not? So that's how I ended up in Minnesota.
And so how long have you been in Minnesota?
A year and a half now.
And you're settling in nicely? Is this, I mean, I don't
Yes,
want to trap you the rest of your life, but you're comfortable there.
I am. The people here is the best part for me. Just Minnesota nice is a thing, and the people here are just wonderful. I've had the opportunity to meet some really, really genuinely kind people. Especially when you're living somewhere where you don't have family, they've been very hospitable and welcoming. And yeah, it's been great working in the community here.
Hi, I want to take just a second, or a couple of seconds, I guess, to talk to you about some of the cool stuff we have going on over at Kates-Boylston.com. The first, and I think the most timely, is the ACE Award. The American Cemetery Excellence Award is accepting applications now, and I can't recommend applying strongly enough. It is a great chance to brag about your cemetery, to brag about your staff, to brag about your grounds, anything that you think you do as well as anyone else. It's time to celebrate that. So take a look at the application. The link is in the show notes, and I'm sure it is something that you will find worthwhile for your cemetery. We also have a ton of events coming up for the next year. Actually, we have all of our events posted. I have a webinar coming up this week. If you are listening to this as it comes out on Monday, we've got a webinar on Wednesday with At-Need Marketing that I've already done kind of a preview on it. It's going to be a really cool presentation on some of the things that you can do by yourself and should be at least considering doing by yourself as far as marketing. And finally, we are making a subscription push for all of our products, all of our digital products, and I'm the editor of Funeral Service Insider. There's lots of stories that I write. I usually mention them here, but they are behind a paywall. And the reason that they're behind a paywall is that they're stuff no one else is doing or talking about or making an effort to cover, at least in the way that we are. So, for instance, I just did a feature on some of the big changes at NGL recently. I'm doing another one that is, I think, the beginning of a really interesting kind of time on insurance in general and how some of the insurance companies are making their way around not just pre-need, but funeral service in general. There's tons of stuff that we do and all the magazines that you can only see or have access to if you're a subscriber. And there are specials going on now. So again, there is a link to the show notes. Please check it out. Now, let's get back to the story with Tiffaney. How did you find yourself writing for Funeral Director Daily, or at least submitting a story to Funeral Director Daily?
So Tom Anderson used to own and manage the funeral home, Anderson Funeral Home, that I work at. And I met him shortly after starting here last year. And recently, so I'm at a colleague's dad's funeral who was also a funeral director. And we got to talking and he said, well, Tiffaney, I'm going to be on a panel at the University of Minnesota at an event in a couple of weeks. And they are looking for a female funeral director. And I think you would be a really good fit because of your international experience and the students. I'm sure they will have interesting questions for you. Would that be something that you'd be interested in? And then I thought, you know what? Why not? I was like, absolutely. Caught me in. So then, about a week later, I reached out and we talked about it and he sent me the material. We, reviewed some students' assignments and went and we were on the panel. And then I actually drove down to the University of Minnesota with Tom. And on the way back, we were talking about Funeral Director Daily because I subscribe and I read his articles. And, I was saying to him that, it's great what he does because I'm not much of a writer. But I have always had an interest in funeral service outside of just the funeral home and looking after families. That's obviously at the core of what I do. And, I absolutely love that element to it. But I feel very strongly about, the development and advancement of our industry and how things work for funeral directors and how we can better ourselves so we can better serve families. And he said, well, if you write something, then I'd be happy to publish it on Funeral Director Daily for you. And I was like, I don't know about that. I'm not much of a writer. Never ever considered myself a writer, but I will see. And so I kind of accepted it as a bit of a challenge. And then I decided to write, and I had a few topics, and I think I was doing my cremation course a few months ago. And then I read that statistic on, this being one of the crises facing our industry. And I thought, why not write about that? And then I sort of went back and forth and drafts, like so many drafts and all the rest of it, because I really am not a good writer.
I can't. Really not a good writer is putting out something that's garbage. And that's certainly not what you've done here. So
Right.
if it took you longer than you thought it was supposed to take, well, let me tell you a secret as someone who is a writer, it's supposed to take a long time.
Right. Well, I found that out.
Now, because a lot of what you said, it's first of all, is excellent. And I've linked to the story before, and we'll have a link in the show notes. But it's, I think, impressive that you decided to put it in essay form as opposed to, 10,000 like TikTok posts or,
Right.
Facebook shares or whatever. So how did you decide on this as a format? Because this is a long form, what counts as long form today anyway, right? It's got to be 1,200 words or so. So how did you decide that this is the way you wanted to tell this story? And how did you put all this stuff together? Because it's really detailed as well.
Yes. So again, I'm not much of a writer, so I don't even think about, okay, this is what an article looks like. So I initially did it somewhat of a research paper, to be honest. And then I got my brother to read it, and then he helped me sort of narrow it down a little bit. I did this format because I started first with an outline of what I wanted to say in terms of outlining the problem, how it affects us, and then how can we find solutions? What solutions could I suggest? And then that's how I ended up doing that format.
What did you not know going in that you learned through your research, and did it reshape your argument?
I think something that's always concerned me as someone who's moved 1,000 times, I think something that concerned me was the fact that we had to get a new license in every state, and then we had to take an exam for almost every state. And I was thinking, what do other professions do? And then that was when I came across the nurse license compact. And I think, well, that something like that would be very helpful in our industry because, like I said, funerals are fundamentally the same. There are little cultural differences and little things that we do different here or there. But why can't we have something like that? So that's something that I found interesting when I was doing my research. But also something that I had come across actually on your podcast was the program, the Afterlife Mortuary Services Summer Camp program,
Yeah.
where so I came across that on your program some time ago, and I thought something like that would be really useful if we had that across the US, across the industry, where we were giving students the opportunity to come into the funeral home, see what it's really like, and maybe, those who it resonates with, they will stay in the industry and go on to have meaningful careers in the industry. That's a way to attract people into the industry because like I said, for me, it was going into that funeral home when I was a teenager and, having that experience that made it solidified for me that I wanted to be in funeral service. And I have absolutely loved my journey. I've absolutely loved, I do love what I do. And so that was really, really nice to hear that story. I remember at the time, and then I went back and looked at it, and then I did some research about it, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty neat.
I'd love to talk about the traveling funeral director, though, because that is, I don't think that won't be a job in 10 years. I think you're kind of right on the gist of it, if nothing else. And so how do you see that working? And what was it just inspired by the nurses? Can you see how that would be? Well, go ahead.
No, so the company I work for, Verton, we actually do have travel funeral directors who fill those roles and, travel from one location to the next to cover where we have staff shortages, or whether it's people being off on annual leave or people being off, or just that particular location is short. So that's something that I've learned through the company that I work for.
Do you see that as something that someone could sign up for? Like, do you see like a central clearinghouse for, I need a funeral director for this next week, and you pay someone to come in for 2 weeks to cover your own vacation? I know a lot of times independent places here is like, well, I'll ask Charlie next door if he could look over the shop while I'm gone. But making it so it's less stressful, that seems like a reasonable solution.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I found a website when I was doing my research, which is how I found out it wasn't unique to the company that I work for, the Traveling Funeral Directors of America. So there is something. It's
Ah,
an agency. So it does exist. So that's something that I came across when I was doing my research as well. So it wasn't unique to the company that I work for.
and was there anything else that kind of blew your hair back a little bit? Was there something where you're like, I can't believe that this is still a problem?
Well, yeah. So something that the one of the solutions that I suggested was creating roles where the the role of a funeral director at the way things are in the US versus how things are in the UK is the funeral director does pretty much everything. And I love that. That was one of the motivating factors in me coming to school because like I said, I've always been the type of person who's an all-rounder and I wanted
Mm.
to learn embalming. I wanted to be able to do it all. So and that's great. And I'm happy that I've had the opportunity to do that. And I actually do enjoy embalming. But I think having to be on call during the nights, going to work in the morning, serving the families during the nights, having multiple calls, I think that can be a little bit exhausting. And it's
It can
one
be.
of
Yeah.
yeah, it is. So one of the key things the NFDA said that I pointed out in my article was you know, a lot of people leave the profession not just because of a paycheck, but because they just don't have the time to balance their family life, their personal life with their work. And I love that funeral directing, it can take you anywhere at any time. I absolutely love that element to it. But I also don't feel it should be, I don't think the way it is quite the right way because you have these few funeral directors. We're already struggling for staff. And then the few funeral directors you have, they're constantly fighting burnout. They're constantly fighting exhaustion. And in the UK, the way I worked is I was a funeral director. I focused on looking after the families at the point of the arrangements, setting up for viewings and things like that. And then I also did the services on the day. However, we had a team that did all the transfers. So this was an in-house team. So this was full-time staff that did the transfer. It's a little bit different in that we had drivers who drove the hearse, the limousines, and that sort of thing, because that's more of the tradition there. And that role was all wrapped into one day, looked after maintaining the cars and that sort of thing. So you had the funeral directors whose sole focus was to look after the family. And I thought that was pretty neat, even though I was on call once every 3 weeks. We had funeral directors who were on call who just took the calls and then they got through to that team and that team went and did the transfers. I just think that worked very well.
And
Again, it
people
doesn't
weren't
take
surprised.
no, not at all, because these were staff of the
Right.
funeral home. So it worked out where they were trained staff to do their roles. They did the transfers. They would take an information pack with them, hand it to the family, and ask the family to give us a call, or we gave the family a call in the morning, made an appointment for them to come in and make the arrangements. And the role of an embalmer was different as well. Now, like I said, I do love being an all rounder and being able to do it all, but I think to the point where we're sort of forcing someone to go to school to be both an embalmer and a funeral director. I don't think it's one that I don't completely agree with, because I think having the option is great because, like I said, for me, that is something that I do value personally. And I know there are lots of others like myself that do, but also there are people who have no interest in being an embalmer, but would make amazing funeral directors.
One of the things that I would like to envision for the future is that making embalming completely separate in all states. It is separate in some states, and I think New Jersey and a couple just started offering a different license. But I also think it's important that the first time you handle a dead body shouldn't be someone's when you're working, and so maybe
Right.
a body care ritual washing, something kind of
Right.
course to fill in where you understand. You have to, I think, if you're going to be a funeral director, it's important to understand how the body should look, and
Oh,
how to care for a dead body. But I don't know if you need to know how to do the literal embalming to be effective,
absolutely.
especially as embalming fades.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a funeral director in the UK, I had to occasionally do a bit of here or there, a bit of cosmetics here or there. I had to understand how that decedent should be presented for the family. So that was a part of my role as well. However, I didn't have to do the full-on embalming. I wanted to, and that's why I decided to come to the US to study here. But there are others who don't want to, and that doesn't take away from them being amazing funeral directors. When I went to school in Florida, we had the option you could apply for a funeral director program, or you could apply for a combination program where you are, at the end of it, you're on track to becoming a licensed funeral director embalmer rather than, or you could just be a funeral director. So I think that would pull more people into our industry if they didn't have to do the full-on embalming. But of course, some decedent care is training is necessary. Absolutely.
And also the idea of being able to move. I think that's not only critical but well overdue.
I agree.
It's insane that, I mean, I can move anywhere and write, I mean,
Exactly.
the stakes are a little bit lower. Obviously, I can just, if I make a mistake, I just get a little bit of hate mail and I'm in red face for a while, but I don't ruin anybody's life in that kind of way.
True. But I think once you've completed mortuary school, you're trained to be a funeral director, you've completed an internship, because some states, if you haven't worked as a licensed funeral director for a year, you may have to repeat that internship. So I think once you're licensed in one state, then you should be able to transfer that license over to another state fairly easily. You can at the moment, but you still have to take that state exam, which is where they have different laws. And I like to picture America as all the states somewhat operate as different countries almost.
Yes. No, it's not somewhat, and it's not almost.
But, if the nurses can do it, then why can't funeral directors do it?
There is no good reason, and we're going to go ahead and end it on that question from my side of the microphone, but there's still more on your side. Is there something I should have asked and I didn't ask, or something that you thought you'd get the opportunity to say, but I didn't provide it?
No, I think we covered everything very well. Tony, thank you so much for having me on. It's been, a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Can we look for more stories out of you and Funeral Director Daly?
We'll see. We'll see. And I say that very nervously because the pressure to write. But we'll see. You never know.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Tony. Appreciate you.
In a business built on trust, consistent financial strength speaks volumes. That's why I'm proud to share that AM Best has once again affirmed Homesteader's financial strength with an A- excellent rating. Last year was a transformative one for our company, and AM Best affirmation tells us we're on the right track. As a mutual company owned by our policy owners, we remain laser focused on delivering dependable value, industry-leading support, and future-ready solutions to funeral professionals nationwide. Homesteaders is stronger than ever by every measure. Our partners rely on us for the long term, and it is critical that we execute at a high level today while aggressively planning for the future. Reach out to your Homesteaders account executive to hear more about how we are leading the profession in investing in tools and services that benefit funeral providers.
I'm really happy to report that this is the first show that came from my little speech at the end, which says if you want to reach out to me, here's how, because Tiffaney heard that I had mentioned her article on my weekly In Case You Missed It podcast. It comes out on Fridays, and she reached out and she said, hey, I would like to come on and elaborate. And I said, I would like to have you on to elaborate. And then we got this really cool show out of it. So if you want to reach me, you can do it at 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233, extension 709. You can leave a message and tell me that you want it or don't want it played on the air, and I will do that very thing. It is a great way for us to stay in touch with one another and for me to know what I'm doing that you like and what I'm doing that you don't like. Everything else you can find in the show notes, including how to email me. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you are listening now and check the show notes for everything else. We will catch you next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.